Sarah initiated an awkward conversation with her husband a few days before Christmas when he returned home from work and a woman had called him. "Is there anything you want to say to me?" asked Sarah, emphasizing the last words. "What does this have to do with me? She probably called the wrong number." "And if it happens, there is nothing strange about it," the man replied, making every effort to sound natural and breathing a sigh of relief. Although she felt that her husband was not being completely honest with her, the problem was that Thomas had been acting really weird lately. He had started staying late at work for no good reason and even set a new password on his cell phone. At the same time, Thomas started acting cold and distancing himself from his wife, as if she had done something wrong. Living with her husband for about 9 years, she knew him like the back of her hand, and of course, she knew when he was there. The wife was also worried because the couple had a daughter who had just turned 8. The couple had passed through some difficult times in their marriage. They've had fights and not spoken for hours and even broken a few dishes in the spur of the moment, but they've always reconciled and never held grudges against each other. But now, for the first time in years, Sarah saw her husband being completely indifferent to her and her family as a whole. Her friends at work insisted her husband was probably having a relationship with someone else. "No, Tomas, it's not like that. He must be having a hard time at work, and the stress was getting to him," said Sarah, trying to convince her friends as well as herself. But when Thomas started making up all sorts of excuses and practically spending several nights out of the house, the woman began to think that her friend's opinion was true. Of course, Sarah was not ready for the possibility of a divorce, which would be the worst-case scenario she could imagine. Deciding that she needed concrete evidence to accuse her husband of infidelity, Sarah started checking her phone calls and messages and realized that her husband had wiped his phone memory completely, and there was virtually no information on his cell phone. "This way, Thomas is hiding something from me," thought the woman, wondering if eventually, her husband would make a mistake, and she would be able to catch him in the act. In order to find out who Thomas was talking to, Sarah requested a printout of all calls and messages from her husband to an old friend who worked at the operator's mobile network and had access to the databases. So when Sarah had the number that called her husband the most in her hands, the first thing she did was try to call it back. But she was surprised when a strange woman answered the phone. Sarah was already mentally prepared for the situation, but it was still a difficult moment for her. She decided to make an appointment with the stranger. "Okay, we can meet. But it would be better if you came to me," replied the voice on the other end of the line. Sarah's heart was pounding, and her legs were shaking on her way to the meeting. Approaching the door, she stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and rang the bell. Sarah had to wait at least 2 minutes before the door finally opened. Imagine her surprise when she saw a woman in a wheelchair on the other side of the door. "This is really Thomas's lover," thought Sarah, meticulously looking her rival from head to toe. The silent scene lasted several seconds before the supposed lover asked, "So, will you just stay standing in the doorway, or are you going to come in?" The stranger looked hostile and several years older than Sarah, and clearly not the prettiest woman. "Before entering, I would like to know what is your relationship with my husband," asked Sarah, having difficulty keeping her voice calm. The stranger smiled knowingly and said, "Well, for starters, my name is Emily Thomas. We intend to be together, and I am also pregnant with a child. Don't mind the wheelchair, it's only a temporary injury. I fell down the steps when I slipped on the snow," Emily replied, staring into Sarah's eyes. Listening to her words, Sarah could barely keep a straight face, and her hands started to shake. Not knowing what to say next, Sarah said goodbye, turned around, and went home. Though she could barely stay standing, over herself now, the woman knew everything. "Thomas cheated on me with that old woman, but why? What did I do wrong with him?" Sarah thought as tears started to flow down her face. Now that she had all the information, all Sarah could do was talk to her husband, who was acting as if nothing had happened. "What does that mean? Why didn't you tell me you had another family?" asked Sarah, being as direct as possible. "What should I tell you? Yes, I love another woman. I am a free man, and I have the right to do what I want," replied Thomas, deciding to put an end to the conversation. "And as for his daughter, what will she think? Have you thought about it?" Sarah exclaimed, having difficulty holding back her tears. "In our daughter's case, I will help as much as I can, and she will understand everything when she grows up," replied Thomas, and started to pack his things, intending to move in with Emily. For the first time after their 9 years of marriage, Sarah realized that there was nothing she could do. Her husband was leaving for another woman. Thomas left the family that very night. All he took was a bag of his belongings. Sarah couldn't help but notice a look of triumph on his face, caused by feeling superior over his humiliated wife. The woman spent the night crying and cursing her fate for having known Thomas, who turned out to be a liar. Now the days dragged on endlessly. To heal, they were full of heartache and regret for all the years she wasted with Thomas. But time passed, and when it was 3 months since the breakup, Sarah suddenly realized that strange things were happening to her body. At first, the woman thought it was just a hormonal imbalance caused by stress. But when Sarah decided to take a pregnancy test and it came back positive, it became clear that she was going to be a mother again. Unfortunately, when the woman separated from Thomas, she had no idea she was pregnant. "What should I do now?" Sarah thought, wiping her tears. And after getting exhausted trying to figure out what to do, the woman decided to go to Thomas and tell him everything. After all, we are not complete strangers, thinking it was the right decision, rushed to Emily's house. But when Thomas opened the door with an annoyed look on his face and asked why Sarah came, she was very disheartened. "So what do you want from me?" "I don't mind supporting the baby as long as it's mine, of course. So come here after giving birth and don't forget to take a paternity test first. And now I have to go. We have a lot of things planned for today," Thomas said after hearing his wife's story. Sarah stood there and cried softly, looking at the door that Thomas had just slammed in her face. The woman didn't expect Thomas to act this way. He left her to deal with her pregnancy and her daughter alone. The first thing Sarah did when she got home was to throw out all the pictures of her ex-husband. She wanted him out of her life and memory. It wasn't an easy decision for her to make, but she knew it was the only right choice. She wouldn't be able to move on otherwise. It's hard to imagine what an abandoned pregnant woman had to go through before she was able to gain some tranquility and self-confidence. The remaining 6 months before the birth passed quickly. She became the mother of 2, her 8-year-old daughter named Camila and her newborn son. The joy of motherhood had a positive effect on the woman's state of mind. She decided to dedicate her life to her children. One day, returning from a walk with her 1-year-old son Sarahville, she saw a familiar silhouette at the door of her house. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" the woman asked in surprise and continued pushing the cart. "We need to talk." "Basically, I'm ready to come home," Thomas blurted out, looking hopefully into his wife's eyes. "But I'm not ready to take you back and forget about us." "You made your choice, and I accepted," replied Sarah, told in a different tone, and opened the front door. "Wait, you can't do this to me," exclaimed Thomas, but the woman had already pushed the cart into the house and slammed the door in his face. The truth was that Emily had deceived Thomas from day one. Apparently, she even pretended her back injury to make Thomas feel sorry for her and convince him to leave his wife to live with her. But that wasn't all. The main news was that Thomas actually wasn't the father of Emily's child. The real father appeared soon after she gave birth and claimed his rights as a father. Having now lost both women in his life, Thomas had the door shut in his face, trying to come to terms with the fact that he lost his last chance to start over. Finally, after pulling himself together, Thomas went to the bus stop with the intention of leaving the city where his personal life was definitely ruined. Thanks for watching. Help the channel by liking the video and subscribing. We have new videos every week. Until next time.